Hello everyone, welcome back to CREDX Live. I'm Darshil Khund. Last episode, we covered one of the biggest funding weeks in United States, that was AI, enterprise softwares, power infrastructures, defense technology, semiconductors. Those were the dominant investment themes. But today, we are heading north, so that is Canada. For years, many investors has viewed Canada startup ecosystem as a smaller version of Silicon Valley, right? A place that has produced the talented founders, excellent universities, and companies that often relocated to the United States once they reach skills. But that narrative is changing. This week proved something important. What was it? Canada isn't just simply producing software startups anymore. It's producing companies solving problems that government, militaries, semiconductor manufacturers, and critical infrastructure operators urgently need to be solved. So AI is changing that. So now let's understand what happened last week. So unlike the United States, Canada didn't produce dozens of massive venture rounds, but instead it produced something arguably more important, that is validation. And it was institutional validation. Because according to this week CREDX intelligence report, Canada's biggest funding announcement centered on two strategic sectors. One is Arctic defense technology and second is semiconductor precision engineering. That may sound niche. It isn't. Because both industries sit directly underneath the global AI economy. One protects critical infrastructures while other powers it. Together, they signal that Canada venture ecosystem has entered a new commercial phase. And here is what stood out immediately. The biggest investor this week weren't only venture capital firms. They included BDC Capital, OMERS, Royal Bank of Canada, and institutional investors, as well as National Development Organization, pension funds. So these organizations don't usually invest because something is trendy, right? They invest because they believe an industry has become strategically important, and that distinction matters because when a pension fund begins investing directly into venture backed technology companies, so they are making a long term economic statement, not a short term financial trade, right? And that's exactly what has happened this week. So let's zoom in into what has happened last week. So our first story isn't just Canada's biggest funding announcement, it's one of the most important venture stories anywhere this week. Ottawa, which I'm currently right now based, right? Ottawa based Dominion Dynamics has announced the 139 billion Series A, making it Canada's largest ever defense technology Series A financing. Think about that not the biggest defense round this year, the biggest in Canadian history. The financing was led by Georgian with participation from extraordinary syndicate that included Valor Equity Partners, Omers Ventures, BDC Capital Strong North Fund, Royal Bank of Canada, Deloitte Ventures, Lake Stars, Bessemer Venture Partners, British Columbia Investment Management Corporation, Golden Ventures, and several others. When you see that more this many sophisticated investors joining one financing, pay attention. They are not simply investing in one company. They are investing in emerging industry. So what exactly does Dominant Dynamic build, right? The company flagship platform is called AuraNet. AuraNet combines remote sensor with mapping software to create real-time awareness across areas where traditional communication barely exists. So you can imagine trying to monitor thousands of kilometers of Arctic wilderness, right? No reliable secular services, extreme weather, minimal infrastructure, and that's where AuraNet operates. It collects information, track movements, transmit intelligence, and provides situational awareness in places that have historically been extremely difficult to monitor. This isn't theoretical technology, it's already been deployed. During Operation Nunalivit, Canadian Rangers uses Dominion software and sensors to support mission planning, communication and operational tracking in Arctic exercises. And that matters enormously because investors increasingly want proof, not prototypes. Like they want real deployment, real customers, real operational validation, and Dominion already has all these three tick mark, right? So this funding tells a much more bigger story. So now let's head to another funding round. So over the past several years, Canada has significantly increased its focus on Arctic sovereignty and defense modernization. As geopolitical tensions rise, monitoring Northern Territory has become a national priority, and Dominion happens to solve exactly that problem. The company plans to expand its team from approximately 50 employees to more than 100 by end of 2026 while opening offices in both United States and Europe. Even more ambitious, management is targeting a 3,000 square foot manufacturing facility capable of eventually thousands of employees. That's no longer startup thinking. That's like an industrial strategy, right? So now let's head to the next thing. Perhaps the most important detail wasn't just about the funding amount, it was one investor, Omers, one of the Canada's largest pension funds. According to this week report, Omers' participation reflects something much larger than a single investment. It suggests defense technology has moved from being viewed as speculative to being viewed as investment grade infrastructure, and that is a very remarkable shift. Institutional investors rarely move first, but once they move, entire industry often follow, right? So every founder watching this should ask one important question: what critical problem does your country need solved? Because increasingly, the biggest venture opportunity sits where commercial demands meet national importance. Like in anywhere, AI, energy, cybersecurity, defense, semiconductor, critical infrastructure. These aren't simply technology sectors anymore. They are strategic priorities. And when government, corporation, venture firms, and pension funds all agree on something that matters, capital does follow. So now from Ottawa, we will travel to Montreal, where one startup is quietly solving one of the AI's most overlooked engineering problem: timing. Yes, timing. Why does AI data center need precision clocks? Why are semiconductor investors betting millions on invisible technology? And why Canada has become a global leader in one of the AI most critical hardware category? Stay with us. Now we will discuss that what Montreal startup is doing in AI infrastructure, because earlier we explored that Canada biggest venture story of the week, Dominion Dynamics, a company building technology to protect Canada Arctic. Now we are shifting from defense to semiconductor. While everyone talks about GPUs, very few people talk about what allows those GPUs to actually work together. Today's story isn't just about one of the smallest component inside an AI server that solves one of the biggest engineering problems, that is timing. Because Montreal based Rathera announced a 55 million Series B, bringing the company's total funding to 75 million. The round was led by Maverick Silicon with participation from Celesta Capital, BDC Capital, MediaTek Innovation Fund, TXC Corporation, and Ultratech Capital Partners. Unlike many semiconductor startups chasing AI accelerator or processors, Strathera focus on something much less visible, yet absolutely very essential. That is precision timing. The company developed MEMS based silicon timing technology, high precision clocks that keeps complex computing system synchronized. The new funding will support mass production of its second generation timing chips for next generation computing infrastructure. So let's simplify this, right? Imagine an orchestra, 100 musicians, each incredibly talented. But if every musician play at a different speed, the performance will fall apart, right? So AI infrastructure work exactly the same way. Inside modern AI data centers, thousands of processors work simultaneously, and every processor must perform calculations at precisely the right moment, not milliseconds apart or not microseconds apart, and often measured in billions of a second. And that's why precision timing matters most. Without synchronization, even the world's fastest processors become dramatically less efficient. And Strathera isn't just building the engine, it's building the conductor. And without the conductor, the orchestra doesn't perform. So now look closely why investor Maverick Silicon, MediaTek Innovation Fund, TXC Corporation, Celesta Capital, these aren't general venture firms making broad AI bets. They are the specialists, organizations that understand semiconductor manufacturing, hardware commercialization, and global supply chains. When domain experts invest, their due diligence is often measured in months, not weeks. The technical team evaluate patents, manufacturing readiness, customer demand, and engineering execution, and that makes this investment particularly meaningful. It signals confidence not only in Strathera but in the broader Canadian semiconductor ecosystem as well. So now let's perhaps the most important part of his story. It's where it's happening. Do you know why? Montreal. Over the past several years, multiple Canadian semiconductor startups have either relocated to the United States or been acquired by American companies. Strathera represent a very different story. Instead of moving south, it's attracting American semiconductor capital while keeping its engineering center in Canada. And that sends an important message to founders because you don't necessarily need to relocate your company to attract world class investors. And if your technology solves a very enough problem, capital will travel. Capital are willing to travel, especially in deep tech, because one pattern deserves very special attention, and that is BDC Capital participated in both. That is Dominion Dynamics and Strathera. And that's not coincidence. Those investments represent two complete different industries, different technology and semiconductor engineering. Yet both share one characteristics. Strategic national importance. This tells something important about Canada innovation strategy. Public capital isn't simply funding startup; it helping build industries. And industry expect to create IPs, advanced manufacturing, high skilled employment, and long term economic resilience. That's much more mission than chasing financial return alone as well. So let's take a moment. This week funding activity wasn't random. Two industry dominated. One defense technology, another semiconductor precision engineering. Both attracted institutional investors, both has attracted government participation, both solve infrastructure problems, and both strengthen Canada's strategic position in an increasingly competitive global economy. And for founders, that's an important lesson because the next generation of billion dollars companies won't necessarily come from social media or consumer apps. They may come from solving high technical problems that very few people understand, but that entire industry depends on, right? So now we will examine one of the biggest trend emerging from Canada venture ecosystem. Why pension funds, government investment organization and institutional capital are investing alongside traditional firms. We will also explore what this funding round tells us about the future of Canadian innovation and why founders should pay close attention. So stay with us. And now, so far today we have discussed, we have covered two most remarkable Canadian company. One was Dominion Dynamics and another was Strathera, right? And one protect national security, the another enables next generation computing. Both are from different industry, different founders, different technology. Yet behind both funding rounds, there is much more bigger story. Who is writing the checks? Because venture capital is changing. Traditional VC funds are no longer investing alone. Today, pension funds, government investment agencies, corporate venture funds, and strategic investment partners are becoming equally important players. And Canada is becoming one of the clearest of the transformation. So let's look at the investment syndicate behind this week's biggest Canadian round. Dominant Dynamics attracted support from Georgian, Valor Equity Partners, Omer Ventures, BDC Capital, RBC, Deloitte Ventures, Lakestar, Bessemer Venture Partners, British Columbia Investment Management Corporation, Garage Capital, Golden Ventures, and Silent Ventures. Meanwhile, Strathera both brought together semiconductor specialists, including Maverick Silicon, MediaTek Innovation Fund, Celesta Capital, TXC Corporation, Ultratech Capital Partners, alongside BDC Capital. If you have noticed any pattern between these two, these aren't random collection of investment. Every participant brings something different. Maybe technical expertise or commercial relationship or maybe manufacturing experience, government connection and global distribution, maybe strategic customer. And today's venture round are increasingly about building ecosystem, not just about raising capital, right? So one name appeared repeatedly through this week Canadian funding round. That was BDC Capital. Its participation in both Dominion Dynamics and Strathera highlight a broader strategy. Rather than investing broadly across every technology sector, BDC is concentrating resources where Canada can build lasting global advantages, like defense technology, semiconductor, advanced manufacturing, deep technology, AI infrastructure. These sectors require patience, long, and it has a very long development cycles. It required high technical teams and also very significant capital to operate, right? They often too complex for traditional early stage investment alone as well, and that's where public private partnership become incredibly valuable. So let's spend a moment about Omers, and because this isn't simply another investor, it's one of the Canada's largest pension fund, and historically many institutional investors views defense technology as highly specialized, political sensitive, or outside their investment mandate, and that mindset is changing. Omer's participation in Dominion Dynamics reflects something much larger than one financing round. It suggests that defense technology is increasingly viewed as essential national infrastructure, not just speculative innovation infrastructure. And that's a profound shift. When pension funds begin investing alongside venture capital, industry often mature much faster and capital become much more patient, right? Founder can gain stronger long-term partners and entire ecosystem benefits from it. So one quote from Dominion Dynamics CEO Elliot Pence took out this week, and he said that it would be misplaced, hubris for me to assume this is really just about dominion. That statement captures what's happening across Canada innovation economy. The company's success isn't occurring in isolation, it's benefiting from broader policy changes. Canada has committed to increasingly defense investment. Arctic sovereignty has become a national priority. Critical infrastructure has become strategically important, and startups capable of solving those problems are beginning to attract unprecedented level of investment. This isn't just replacing entrepreneurship, it's government creating conditions where entrepreneurship can thrive. So, so what founder learn from this funding activity? First, don't underestimate difficult industry. The harder the engineer problem, the fewer competition you will face. Second, technical depth attracts strategic investor. Deep expertise creates stronger competitive advantages than marketing alone. Third, build where your talent exists because you don't need to relocate to Silicon Valley. Great companies can emerge from Ottawa, Montreal, Toronto, or Vancouver, even Winnipeg or Saskatoon as well. Fourth, look for industries where government priorities and commercial demand overlap. Those markets often experience long-term capital support. And finally, focus on problem that matters for decades, no trends that disappears after 12 months. And that's exactly what this winners has done. So, so what we have done is we have examined two largest venture stories of the week, that is Dominion Dynamics, Strathera. At first glance, they seem completely unrelated. One protect Arctic sovereignty, the other synchronize AI processors. Both are from different industry, both has different customers, both has different technologies. But underneath those differences, they reveal one uncommon truth. That is, Canada is no longer competing by building the next social media app. Canada is competing by building technology the world cannot function without. And that's a very different innovation strategy. And one of the investors clearly recognize it. So, so after reviewing every major Canadian funding announcement last week, five themes have stand out. Let's breaking down one by one. For years, Canadian defense startups struggled to attract institutional venture capital. Sorry, and that environment has changed. Dominant Dynamics' historic Series A demonstrate that defense technology has become a legitimate venture category. The participation from Omers Ventures, BDC Capital, RBC, Deloitte Ventures, and other institutional investors signals the national security is no longer viewed as a niche market. Instead, it's becoming critical infrastructure. For founders, this means one thing: problems once considered too government focused are now attracting commercial venture capital. The second signal comes from Montreal. Strathera proves that Canada can still produce world-class semiconductor companies, and most importantly, the company attracted investors who specialize in semiconductor commercialization. That matters because hardware investors evaluate company different than software investors. They look for engineering breakouts. They look for manufacturing readiness, technical differentiation, customer validation. When those investors write checks, they are validating year of technical work, not just market excitement. So another very third one clear emerge pattern, that is government backed capital isn't replacing venture capital, it's multiplying it. BDC Capital participated in both flagship rounds this week, and that has created confidence. Private investor knows government institution have completed extensive technical due diligence, and government participation also reduce risk for industry requiring significant long-term investment, because in sectors like deep technology, semiconductor, advanced manufacturing, and AI infrastructure, those industries don't become global leader overnight. They require patient capital, and Canada appears increasingly willing to provide it. So, one of the biggest lessons this week is policy matters. Canada increased commitment to defense spending, Arctic sovereignty, critical infrastructure, and domestic technology development, and it's creating entirely new commercial opportunities. Dominant dynamics didn't emerge because defense suddenly become fashionable, it emerged because national priority has changed. Entrepreneurs recognize those changes and build solutions before everyone else, and that's often where bigger billion dollars opportunity lies as well. Because finally, this week was reinforced with an important venture capital principle. The hardest company to build are often the hardest company to compete against. Dominant dynamics requires expertise in communication, mapping, sensor, defense operations, and Arctic deployment. Strathera requires years of semiconductor research, precision engineering, and manufacturing development. Those barriers create defensibility, and that's exactly what sophisticated investor wants to see. So, if you are a startup today, here are the 5 practical takeaways from this last week Canadian market. Lesson 1: solve problem that remains important for the next decade, not the next trend. Lesson 2 was don't avoid technical difficulty market. Difficulty often create opportunities. Lesson 3 was strategic investor can bring more value than the highest valuation, and the right investor brings expertise, customer, and also credibility. Fourth was government policy create startup opportunities. Pay attention to sector receiving long-term national investment. Those industries often produce the next generation of venture-backed companies. And fifth was world-class companies don't have to build only in Silicon Valley. Canada has demonstrated that it can attract global capital while building internationally competitive technology at its home ground. So, if I have to summarize the Canada's venture capital story this week in one sentence, it would be this: Canada isn't trying to copy Silicon Valley, it's building technologies that Silicon Valley itself depends on. AI requires semiconductors, semiconductor requires precision engineering, national security requires advanced defense technology. So, those aren't just a temporary market, they are the foundational industries, and that's exactly where long term capital is flowing. And for investors, this represents opportunity. For founders, it represents direction, and for Canada, it represents a new chapter for them. So, next week, we will head to one of the fastest growing startup ecosystem in the world, that is India. We will examine how AI, data center, enterprise software, and the country's newest AI unicorn are reshaping venture capital across Asia. We will also explore why global investors from Canadian pension funds to Silicon Valley VCs are deploying billions into India's innovation economy. So, if you're a founder, investor, or operator, you don't want to miss this. Thank you for joining the another edition of the CREDX Live. So, if today's episode has helped you to better understand where venture capital is heading, share it with a founder or an investor or someone building the future. Follow CREDX Live for weekly startup analysis, founder insight, venture capital trends, and exclusive interviews with people shaping tomorrow innovation economy. I'm Darshil Khund. Keep building, keep investing, keep learning, and remember the best time to understand the future is before everyone else sees it. We will see you tomorrow on CREDX Live. Good night.